I'll go ahead and test my voice again one last time. We're going to start in just 2 minutes. So maybe you could put a Y in the local chat if you can hear me. Looks like I'm all set.
I'm also doing one last mic check. Just if you could put a Y, let me know that you hear me as well. The Ys have it.
All right, it is now 1 o'clock in Second Life, and it's time for us to begin. Welcome everyone to our VWEC Metaverse Expert Series. We are glad to see you and have you join us for today's very interesting presentation and discussion. For those of you who are new, our website is www.vweconsortium.org. You can find VWEC on many social media channels at Linktree. After our presentation today, we will move to the deck for a more formal, no, not formal, a more informal conversation and a social time for those who are able to stay. We are pleased to offer our expert series presentations in both text and voice. Text, for anyone who may not be using voice, is shared on our YouTube live stream right here in the local chat. You can also find the link to the live stream in the sign in front of our stage. Speaking of signs, we would like to know how you found out about our events. Our survey plant has just a quick survey that is a great help to us, and it's right here below the slides in front of the stage. If you would fill it out, and then feel free to send along any comments that you have. We would like to thank you all for joining us for this very interesting presentation today. I am happy to introduce our Metaverse expert speaker to you. Brian Perry, known as Brian Aviator in Second Life, is a computer scientist that enjoys building virtual museum educational experiences. Brian has developed the Museum of Computing History, LGBTQ Museum, and Cultural Center, and the Brevin Cat Island Museum, which is an educational experience on our feline friends within the virtual world of Second Life. I have visited his beautiful museums, which demonstrate the potential for sharing content in well-built and designed 3D simulations. Today, Brian will share curating virtual museums in the metaverse. So over to you, Brian.
Thanks, Val. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As Val mentioned, I'm going to be speaking about curating virtual museums. It's a topic that I've been interested in almost since I first set foot in Second Life back in 2006. And I'll be sharing with you some of the things I've learned, both good and bad, about virtual museums, as well as talking a bit about virtual museums and case studies of the ones I've built. I'm going to walk you through 3 of the museums that I built, what I learned just from talking to people who visited and trying to build them. So I'll be including some case studies as well. So with that said, let's dig in. So the agenda is that I'll just start off with some intros. I'll talk about why bother creating virtual museums. Sometimes people say, do we need virtual museums? We have real ones. But I'm going to talk about why there are some advantages to virtual museums. But I'm also going to speak about some of the disadvantages of virtual museums. Another topic that's come up is the concept of virtual museums as a supplement or an adjunct to real life museums. And then, as I mentioned, I'll do some case studies with my museums, and then certainly open it up to question and discussion. Though, certainly, if you have a question or a comment along the way, feel free to make it, um, preferably in the text chat, obviously, since I'll be using voice to present, and I'll try to keep an eye on that as best I can. If I do miss something in the text chat, when I get to the question and answer at the end, please bring it up. I'm not deliberately ignoring you. It's just a lot going on, and I may miss it. So with that said, so who's this person speaking today? So my name is Brian Perry. I'm the real life typist behind the avatar that you see, Brian Aviator, here in Second Life. My background's actually in computer science, and I've worked my entire career since graduating with my degree in computer science, working in the life science industry in research and development. I've worked on clinical trials. I've worked in pharmacovigilance, which is the study of the safety of medicinal products and medical devices. I've been actively involved in the protection of personal health information and personally identifiable information and cybersecurity within the industry. But most importantly, and probably what matters today, is I have a lifelong interest in education and learning. Teaching other people things about technology and things that I love is something I've done since I was a teenager, and is definitely sort of a passion that I have. So, Brian Aviator, the avatar that you have in front of you, I've been in Second Life since 2006. This particular avatar I think I built in early 2007, but I have been in Second Life since early 2006. I've done a number of educational spaces, some of which Val mentioned, some of which we'll be talking about today. The oldest being the LGBTQ History Museum and Cultural Center, which made its first appearance in Second Life in November 2006. So it's actually been in Second Life in various forms, in various locations, for 18 years this month. Um, some newer creations are the Museum of Computing History and my largest museum in terms of space and number of exhibits. The Brevin Cat Island, which is actually a full region dedicated to our feline friends. It's something that I just decided to do because, well, although I'm a cis male gender, I am a crazy cat lady in spirit. So, and the fact of the matter is, there's a lot of intersection between people that use systems like Second Life and the internet and people that like cats. So it was something, and it gets a fair bit of traffic. I see a heart being posted, so I think we have another cat lover there. One of the latest museums was the Museum of Telecommunications that launched earlier this year. And another museum that I put together was called the Moleseum, and it's actually something really focused on a topic here in Second Life. It's about the work that the moles, which are the contractors to Linden Lab, have done to do a lot of the builds that we can enjoy within Second Life. So that was a pop-up museum that appeared at an event in the summer, and I'm hoping to have it appear again in the future, or even find a permanent home at some point. So that's Brian Aviator and Brian Perry, the real life typist behind. So let's talk a little bit about why create virtual museums. Well, one obvious topic is, well, extended reality and virtual worlds are really a very rich platform for developing interactive 3D experiences. Why? Well, they're spatial. we are here in this virtual auditorium, sitting around in a number of chairs around a fire pit with a display in front of us, but it feels like a place. We are in a place. Um, it's interactive as well. We're able to chat here while we're in this space together. We can interact with objects. For instance, the sign, just if you're facing me to the left of where, if you're looking at me, there's a link to where you can see this on the web as a YouTube stream. So it's interactive. You can touch that object, it will respond to you. In a museum, you can have objects that move, that interact, that change, and such. It's a very rich platform. It's also a shared platform. We're all here in this space together right now, sharing this together. I often do tours of my virtual museums, and we are able to share that experience together and work together doing that. It's also an alternative for people that enjoy using virtual worlds but may not be looking for um, virtual clubs or virtual shopping experiences. While we know for here in Second Life, those are very popular and very well attended usually. The fact of the matter is, there are some people that want to use the platform for other things, and so virtual worlds, virtual education experience offer something that explorers can visit that isn't just a nightclub or shopping experience. Another aspect about virtual world technologies is they're very accessible. Um, Now, I realize Second Life as a platform has a bit of a learning curve. It can be a real challenge for new folks who visit, um, but it's also very accessible in that we can be in different geographic locations, yet all be sitting here in this virtual world together. I'm in the United States on the East Coast. I know, I believe Val is on the West Coast. And I'm sure some of you are located in other locations throughout the world. Yet we can all be here in this space together doing this. It's also accessible by people that might have physical or other limitations in the real world. Virtual ability, for instance, here within Second Life, offers a very rich experience and assistance to folks that have different abilities within their own real lives, but are able to come here together in Second Life and do things together in ways they may not be able to in real life. And the last one, and this one's actually kind of important. Virtual worlds provide a safe place for us to share information and topics that could be either controversial or subject to oppression or other forms of negative response in the world. And I'll talk about that a bit as we talk about some of my um, case studies of the museums I've built, how the safe space concept really matters to some people. All right, moving along. So let's talk about some advantages to virtual museums. I certainly, are aware of many. I bet some of you can think of others as well. But let's talk about some of the advantages, at least that I've experienced and seen in building virtual museums. One obvious one is financial. Virtual real estate is a lot less expensive than real world real estate in general. Um, mind you, there are some locations in Second Life, like Bay City, some other locations that are much more expensive than others. But as a whole, an acre of land, or depending your unit of measure, here we can get a whole region 256 meters by 256 meters, and it would cost, at least in US dollars, several $100s. A similar plot of land, in a major metropolitan area around the world would be significantly more expensive. And that cost comes in a lot of forms. It's the acquisition cost, the cost to buy the real estate, piece of land in the real world can be, you know, tens of thousands to millions of dollars. In virtual worlds, it's typically in the hundreds of dollars range or less. The maintenance and ongoing costs. Real estate costs money in terms of taxes, maintenance, etc. And in Second Life, a whole region can be had for 229 US dollars per month. Mainland is less expensive. A whole region on the mainland is about $166. In addition, um, the supporting costs, utilities, water, sewer, electric, just don't exist in a place like Second Life. Um, so those are all things that matter. Creating a physical museum space is very expensive. I know this because one of the things I had been working on prior to, for instance, building the Museum of Computing History was an attempt at building a small real world museum. I'm located on the east coast of the US, near a major city. I'm not far from Boston, and real estate is very expensive. Even renting a small space to set up an initial museum would cost me significant amounts of money. So it's something to bear in mind, and the ongoing costs can be prohibitive as well. Another thing to bear in mind, acquiring artifacts. As I stated, I wanted to build a real life museum. And in fact, I wanted to do that as a computer history museum, in fact. Um, and acquiring the artifacts for that is, depending on the artifacts you want to include, can be incredibly expensive. They can be quite large. Some of the very early computer systems required rooms full of space to operate, and they require massive amounts of electrical power, air conditioning, and such. I can have those same artifacts in Second Life as 3D objects, and they cost me either zero or small amounts of money, and they are not consuming massive amounts of power to operate, etc. So there's a huge difference, in the ability to afford and have access to artifacts. And quite frankly, some artifacts are just not obtainable. Um, some of the computers I would have loved to have had in my museum in real life would just not be available today. Some of them are there is a computer museum on the west coast of the US in Palo Alto, and there are some wonderful museums in the EU. There's one in the UK, for instance, at Bletchley Park. Some of the equipment at those museums are pretty much one of a kind. I would not be able to uh, do that. So that's something to bear in mind. And then lastly, staff. A real world museum needs some staff. You need security, you need professionals, you will need to maintain your building and grounds. You may need to pay some staff to work as administrators or full-time docents within the museum. Um, that's a little more flexible in the virtual world. A lot of people are willing to volunteer to do those things. And so to say they don't in real life, a lot of museum docents are volunteers that work with the museum on a volunteer basis. But it's a bit easier when you can pull from a talent pool that's the globe for a virtual museum. So there's just a lot of financial advantages to a virtual museum. Flexibility is another advantage. You can change the layout of your museum with probably little or frankly no cost in a lot of cases, unless you need to acquire more land or more space in a virtual world. You can rearrange the museum to your heart's content. And I've done this a number of times. I've decided I need a bigger building. I had the land for it, but I didn't have a big enough building, particularly for the computer museum, which grew a lot over the last couple of years. Um, Not so easy to do in real life. Fairly trivial to do in a virtual world like Second Life. The other thing is I can build exhibits, I can build displays using tools. I will confess I am not a maestro with mesh tools. I typically rely on others or work with others to do wonderful mesh builds. But the fact of the matter is, the tools working with prims in Second Life, you can get a lot done very quickly. The whole concept and the saying in the early days of Second Life, it all starts with a cube, is true. We can res out a cube, we can do all kinds of things with it. In addition, we can build exhibits that defy the laws of physics in a virtual world that we could not do in the real world, or that we don't have the skills or materials to work with in the real world. We can simulate those and create them in a virtual world, and of course, costs. Again, that ties back to the financial aspects. The other thing is we can easily store things. We have an inventory in Second Life. So for exhibits that are not currently on display, I can keep them in inventory. I can move things around. I can change the experience of an exhibit all very easily in a virtual world. Much more costly to do. If you have to move walls or build new walls or change the lighting in the real world, that can be much more expensive. The other thing staff, as I mentioned, can be anywhere in the world. You're not limited to your local talent pool as you may be with a physical real life museum. And so there's a lot of flexibility. The museums that I've built over the last few years and since 2006 have had input from a lot of people and help from a lot of people along the way. It's not something typically one person completely does alone. And a virtual world, being typically a connected spatial social place, allows you to work with volunteers and folks from around the world. This one is what I'm coming back to, this concept of a safe space. As we know, the political world around us, the sentiment of many people around the world changes from time to time. I'm located in the U.S. If anyone happened to not notice, we had an election in the U.S. this week, and things will be changing as a result of that election. Things change, and virtual worlds can provide a safe space for certain topics that could be controversial, that might be subject to oppression in some locations. The virtual worlds can give people a space where they can come in, learn about things, share information, and do so in a pseudo-anonymous manner where they can feel safe. The other thing to consider is it's a lot easier to ensure security and privacy to the extent that we can in virtual worlds compared to the real world. If you wanted to attend a museum that was on a controversial topic or a topic subject to oppression in your locale, you may be afraid to do that in a real life museum because you could be seen entering or leaving, or the fact that you might pay for a donation or an entrance fee on your credit card shows up in records. So you might be apprehensive about that. You might also be apprehensive about your security. You might worry that your safety could be in jeopardy for visiting this museum. And so avatars give us some level of anonymity. Second Life typically only requires an email address to sign up. Payment information is not required. And though certainly Linden Lab would have things like your IP address that you connected from and such, I don't know the real life identity of most of the people that visit my museums, unless they choose to share that information. I just don't know. The other thing is we have powerful access controls. If we see somebody griefing or causing trouble at an event or in a museum, we can eject them. We can ban them if we need to. The one thing I will say, in the last 2 years, I don't believe I have had to eject or ban a single avatar in Second Life. I hope that continues. I can tell you that back in the earlier days of Second Life, 2006 to 2010 or so, I did have to use those tools a bit more often in Second Life. But in the last 2 years, it's been pretty um, pretty stable overall. There are also powerful tools for moderation, for banning if we need them. And the last thing I always remind people, I, I understand that Second Life can be intense. An attack of some sort in Second Life can feel real and certainly have real consequences for us emotionally and psychologically, but you can always log off. Unlike real life, where sometimes I think we'd like to be able to log off, you're not. You're always able. You're not required to be here. If things get uncomfortable, you can log off and come back at another time. The concept of a shared space. I'm not going to go and harp on this too much because I think everyone here in Second Life that's attending this and that might be watching this online, you understand the idea of virtual worlds and virtual technologies as shared spaces. Um, they have the concept of space. They're spatial. I can move to the left. I can walk to the right. I can walk near someone, walk away from someone. It's a space. It's a place. Um, in addition, um, there are since it's a space we can share, it can be used to do group events or classes. On a number of occasions, I've gone to my museum, seen a lot of folks in one of them, and just sort of walked by and said hello and found out that it was a professor bringing their class to the museum in the virtual world. In one case, it was a professor from Connecticut teaching students about virtual world and virtual reality technologies, and he was using the museum as a place to explore that. I also have an educator that comes regularly to the computer museum because he teaches English in a European country. He teaches English to students that are interested in working in technology, and so the museum for him represents a place he can bring his students right within his classroom, in fact, to be able to experience the content that I've provided in English and use it as a tool for English learning. The other thing is we can do tours. There's a picture there on that slide of one of the tours I gave at one of the museums. You can bring tours and they can be experienced by people all over the world. Um, we can do tours automatically. I currently don't have those in the museums that I have, but you can in fact, um, using the tools that we have for scripting, audio, etc., provide people with automated tours that they could follow. Much like sort of the ones where they'll hand someone an electronic device and headphones in a real museum to do a tour. Or you can have a real life docent, and I do live tours of the museums on a regular basis. In fact, some of the folks here today listening to this have attended some of those, and um, and it's a wonderful interactive experience. And we don't all have to be in the same physical space. If we wanted to tour a museum together in the real world, we'd all have to travel there. We'd have to meet up at some arranged time, go in, etc. We don't have to do that here. We can all show up in the virtual world and do this together, from our living rooms, from our offices, wherever. There are some disadvantages as well to virtual museums. The obvious one, they're not real. In the same sense that a physical real life museum is real. And as a result, sometimes the artifacts or displays in the museum are just not going to provide the same experience as a real world artifact. They lack tactile interaction. While we can touch objects within Second Life, we generally, unless we're using some special technology, don't have any tactile feedback. We don't have any haptics or other kinds of direct feedback. Whereas some museums that allow you to touch things and experience things through touch, we just can't do that, at least with current technology available to consumers in virtual worlds. They also lack scent and other sort of non-visual cues, such as, we can do things to try to create an ambience, a feel to an environment in a virtual world, but we can't create scent. Sometimes being in the presence of um, older artifacts, they have a scent to them, and that's part of the experience of experiencing them. Another thing to bear in mind is if you wanted to create a virtual art museum, your ability to display real life original artwork that you don't have rights to, you would be constrained in being able to do that in a lot of cases. So that's something else to bear in mind with virtual museums. And again, the whole idea of the ambiance and the feel of an exhibit just may not translate to a virtual medium. One of the museums I have and talk about is the Museum of Computing History, and I have to say, when I go to a real computer museum, and I'm around some of these very large computers where you literally are walking into a room with them, it's not quite the same feel when I do the same thing in Second Life. So it's something to bear in mind. Um, okay. Virtual museums as supplements to real museums. As Max pointed out, in most museums you're not allowed to touch things. Though I'm thinking about there are often experiences in some museums for children where they do have some artifacts they can touch and experience. Sometimes they're allowed to handle shells. If it's a museum about an aquarium or things like that, or sometimes they're allowed to pet a seal or something like that in an aquarium environment. And so that's sort of what I meant about, or petting zoos, exactly as Mayanuk mentions. So there are definitely some experiences, but certainly in most museums, you're not allowed to touch the artifacts because of the importance of them and the desire to preserve them. Though I will say, many of the real life computing museums I've been to do in fact have interactive displays with old computers where you can walk up to them and use them. You can write a little program. You can interact with them. And while I've tried to have some interactive things like that in the virtual museum, recreating the whole experience of the operation of a computer is not something trivial that we can do in the virtual world, but we can do it, and there's plenty of ways we can. Another topic I just wanted to bring up is the idea of virtual museums as an adjunct or a supplement to a real museum. Uh, I have had conversations with some real curators, or I should say curators of real museums, with an interest in how they could use the virtual to either extend or offer an alternative to their real museums. And so it's certainly a possibility that virtual museums can complement and supplement real museums. They also can be used as a training environment. It's a lot easier to create things and break them and learn from them in a virtual world than it is with priceless artifacts in a real life scenario. And so a virtual museum can in fact just be a training area, or it can be an area for doing simulations. Perhaps a real museum wants to build a new exhibit but is struggling with the design or the best way to present it. A virtual museum platform would allow someone to create, experiment with that before building those in real life. They could prototype the environment in a virtual world. But in addition, virtual museums available to the public in some form can be a wonderful supplement to a real world museum. The whole idea that they're feel or seem more like a video game can appeal to younger generations and bring them in and let them experience topics that they may be less excited to do in real life, particularly if it involves a 3 hour car ride to get there. The other thing is about timing. A virtual museum can be online all day, all night, all weekend. Doesn't have hours that it's open or closed, so it can be visited anytime. Or if you'd gone to a real life museum and it indicated that you want to learn more about this and follow up on your own time, visit our virtual exhibits. So there is that option as well. And it definitely could allow you to explore topics and exhibits in more detail. Um, and that can be valuable if there's topics where somebody might be embarrassed or afraid to explore them while their family and friends are with them in a real life museum. um, the virtual museum can offer a way that they can do so privately on their own time. Okay, I'm going to do a couple of case studies. And the first one, and these are based on my own experiences building virtual museums within Second Life. And the first one I'm going to do is talk about my oldest museum in Second Life, which has been around since 2006. It's actually 18 years old this month. So at least here in the U.S., I guess it has become an adult. So let's talk about that museum a little bit and some of the things I've learned from that. So the LGBTQ History Museum and Cultural Center has been in Second Life since 2006. In fact, if you look at the slide that I have up right now, the picture at the top is the original museum as it existed in 2006. In all of, I do have better photos of that if anyone cares to see it, but you can see it there in all of its prim glory, using textures and plants, made of four intersecting textures, etc. But it existed in November of 2006 was when it first came to life. Um, the museum has been at multiple events within Second Life. So there is an event every June called Second Pride within Second Life that is effectively like a Pride Month celebration within our virtual world here. We have had exhibits at a number of those. We've been asked to provide them. Uh, Currently, the museum is located in the McLean region of Second Life. Um, and there are many exhibits for the museum throughout Second Life. There's one in the region Che Che at the Cave Lounge and Lanes. There's one in the London Town Gateway, which just came online about a month ago. The Pride at Home region has a mini exhibit, and we've been at various SLB celebrations since I think 2007 was the first one we were at, and we've been at quite a few since. In addition, the museum is in the Second Life Destination Guide, and we've also been fortunate that um, Linden Lab has chosen the museum during Pride Month in June a number of times as a location that they feature. It drives massive amounts of traffic to us when they do that. The LGBTQ Museum has quite a few exhibits. Um, some of them are full-time exhibits that are there all the time, just general history and timelines, uh, information about activism and organizations, information about the HIV virus and AIDS, information about marriage and relationships, an influential people exhibit, and most recently, just a few weeks ago, we added permanent exhibits for LGBT authors and literary works, featuring both individual authors as well as many of their works over the years. And then there's a number of transient exhibits that come and cycle through from time to time, about different locations or LGBT heroes from the 9/11 days, or LGBT athletes. So, what were some lessons learned from building an LGBTQ museum? Well, I have received a lot of IMs from people over the last 18 years thanking me for having something like this in Second Life. And they've said, um, I can't access this information in my country. It's just not allowed. And if I were to do it, I could be subject to some kind of censure or, frankly, risk. I could be physically injured or even put to death for this. And so thank you for having this where I can come here and see this and I don't feel alone anymore. Pretty powerful when I hear people say that. And you can visit it privately. I think I mentioned before one of the advantages um, is that you can visit this privately. So even if you're in a location where this isn't, quite as taboo, um, perhaps this is not something you're just exploring and not something you are ready to, be known for or to share with family and friends, and you want. Here in the United States, there are a few, and some of them are wonderful, but a lot of people live in locations where they don't have ready access to one. And so the fact that they can come into a virtual museum here in Second Life is something they appreciate. The other thing I think I mentioned, early on in the life of the LGBTQ museum, it did get a lot of grief or attacks um, and some rather hateful attacks at times. And the security tools in Second Life, the ability to eject and ban, the ability to lock things down for a period of time if you need to, have been very helpful. Um, and of course, visitors are a great resource for new content. Every year, I've added more exhibits to the museum, and many of the ideas for those exhibits come from people that are visiting the museum in Second Life and reach out to me and say, hey, one of my heroes is not in the influential people exhibit. Would you consider adding them? I think I added at least 5 or 6 this year alone after the Lindens featured us during Pride Month. So many people visited and gave suggestions that I had to add a bunch of things, to the influential people exhibit, for instance, back in June, July of this year. So visitors are a great resource in the virtual. Or I get people. I got a wonderful suggestion from someone in India. Now I'm located in the U.S., so I'm not as well versed in these topics in other countries. So the fact that somebody in India was wonderful and reached out to me and made some suggestions, I added some content for that. That's something that I may not have experienced if I were running a real world museum for this. I just may not have come in contact with those folks. So visitors are just a great resource for improving content. I'll mention that we just recently opened an exhibit on literary authors and their works. That was actually suggested by someone here in Second Life. In fact, she went so far as to send me a bunch of information to start my work on building that exhibit. So it was fantastic. My other case study is on my other two of my other museums, and the reason I'm lumping them in together is they're very complementary, and the topics are almost the same, and sort of the lessons learned are the same from each. So I've lumped these two together, and that's the Museum of Computing History and Museum of Telecommunications. I will say by far the Museum of Computing History is probably one of the most popular museums I have worked on in Second Life. And I guess that's no surprise. The idea that the people using a virtual world might have an interest in technology and computers is not a huge leap to make. But it is also the largest museum. It was first came online in the middle of 2022, and since then it has expanded in size by a factor of 8. I have added way more exhibits, way more floor space. We went from a couple dozen exhibits in the original iteration of the museum to hundreds today. And so I'll talk just a little bit about that. So it originally opened, it was over the summer, but sort of the real launch was September of 2022. It always has a presence lately at the SL Living Expos and at the SLB celebrations. The main museum is located in the Pippin region of Second Life, which is on the mainland on the Sea of Fables. and it is listed in the Second Life Destination Guide. The Computing Museum has quite a few exhibits, so ranging from early pre-PC computing. The first sort of oldest represented artifact in the museum is one of the earliest computing devices known to humans, and that is the abacus. And it goes all the way through current day technologies such as artificial intelligence and machine learning and quantum computing. So it really does cover sort of the concepts of computing from hundreds of years ago to today. And there's a lot of effort put on trying to keep this up to date. AI and quantum computing being two areas that move fast, and I have attempted to try to keep those as up to date as possible. The Museum of Telecommunications is very new. It first opened in March of this year. It did have a presence at the Second Life birthday celebration. It is located in the Pippin region as well. It is actually right next door in a building of the same theme as the one of the Computing Museum, only it's roughly 1/4 the size of the Computing Museum. And it as well is featured in the Second Life Destination Guide. So I'm waiting for the slide to jump over. It doesn't seem to be doing that. There we go. All right. Um, the Telecom Museum has quite a few exhibits, starting with early visual communications. So the use of light signals, smoke signals, semaphores for communicating with technology, all the way through modern technologies such as our mobile voice and data communications, our data and packet switching, which are the technologies behind the internet that we all use, and as well, lots of phones. Turns out a lot of people seem to have an attachment to phones, and so the ability to find phones, models, 3D models for phones is pretty good. So there's quite a few phones, early telephones, the candlestick type phones, telephones with dials. There are exhibits where you can touch a dial and hear what it sounded like. There are exhibits where you can touch a dialing pad for a keypad telephone and hear the touch. They're called touch tones or DTMF tones. So lots of exhibits where you can experiment with that. Experiments on Morse code, where you can do that in both audio or light. Just a lot of exhibits here about communication using technology. So what were some lessons learned from the Computing History Museum, Telecom Museum? I mentioned they're very much alike. The idea here is we're largely talking about a lot of vintage technology equipment in many cases. And the attempting to locate 3D models for some vintage computers and phones can be quite challenging. But I can say, should you want to do something like this or similar to this, there are a lot of online resources that can be tapped to get access to 3D models. There are a number of university collections out there that are being offered either um, as sort of open source or public domain models with free access and use. There's also 3D marketplaces, things like Sketchfab, which just recently changed its name, as well as others where you can purchase and license 3D models that you can upload. You can convert to the model used in Second Life, upload them to Second Life. I did that for quite a few of the models, for instance, in the Computer Museum, and for some of the ones in the Telecom Museum. Um, Again, I want to point out though, if you are purchasing or leveraging ones posted to some of these web marketplaces, you do need to read the licenses. Some of these prohibit the license prohibits the ability to take these models and use them in a and an open virtual world like Second Life. They will allow you to use it in sort of a closed game world, but some limit you. So it's very important to read the license agreements and make sure that you're not violating them when purchasing or using these models. And if you're using models that are licensed under Creative Commons or public domain, certainly you doing some attribution or listing the source of the models is a very good idea. I've tried to do that as sort of religiously as I could in the museums. There's a huge intersection between virtual world users and computer and telecom enthusiasts. I know that should have been obvious, but it's there's a lot of people, that come to these and just seem to really enjoy these two museums within Second Life, for instance. In addition, um, the models for computers and telephones are much more practical to obtain and maintain than their real life equivalents. As I mentioned, some of the computers that we have in the computer museum are very large, and the ability for me to be able to find those, find ones that are operational or ones that I can work on to make operational is not trivial. And even if I could make some of them, I it may not be possible for me to power them. For instance, there was a museum, unfortunately, it's now closed in Seattle called the Living Computer Museum. And I have talked with a number of the folks that were working at that museum and that were docents there or working on restoration projects. And they told me that their electric bill to keep some of this stuff running was in the tens of thousands of dollars per month. Um, and to cool it was insane. So it's just a lot more practical to do some of these things. And particularly with respect to the what I'll call the big computers in a virtual world. And another thing I certainly learned, I know this was kind of true for me. My first computer is very important to me. I still have one. It still works, in fact. Um, and by the way, this is a computer when I was, in elementary school that I received, so it's been around a long time. Um, People really have an emotional attachment to that. The the number of IMs I get from people that are so excited because they see their first personal computer in this virtual museum is I can't I lost count of the number I've received. I see in the chat somebody asked about Amiga. Absolutely, there is an Amiga there. I believe it's an Amiga 500 that's on display. Um, and the other thing I get is, hey, I don't see my first personal computer here, and some people seem really sort of offended or sad that I don't have it, and I sometimes it was just an oversight or I couldn't find a model at the time. Several times just in the last 6 months that's happened to me, and I've since added those computers to the museum, and I am the person and said, you mentioned this one, it's there now. And then I get an IM, oh wow, it's so great to see it, and they're so excited. So it was certain one thing I learned, people really do have emotional attachments to their first personal computer, as well as some of their mobile devices. I do have some mobile devices that were some of the first, within the 1990s that could do wireless data and things like that. And some people say, "Oh wow, I had one of those. It's so great to see it here." So, John, you had asked about the Amiga. So there is a 500. I think there might be either a 1000 or a 2000 there as well. All right. So continuing on, what did we cover today? So we talked about why create virtual museums. There's a lot of reasons why. They're wonderful platforms and spatial environments for creating interactive 3D experiences. Um, they are spatial. We can share the space together and experience these together. And they can be a safe space for topics that can be controversial or subject to oppression. We learned about some of the advantages. They're a lot less expensive to run than real life museums. Um, 3D models can be a lot easier to obtain, maintain, and use than real artifacts. Um, you can have people visit from around the world at the same time even and experience these together, so there are no geographic limitations, and you have a pool of people that are willing to work with you, either a volunteer or perhaps on a paid basis, from around the world. You're not restricted to recruiting resources just within the location of uh, your museum. There are some disadvantages, and the main one just being that they're not real. There are You can't necessarily provide the same experience at a virtual museum that you can in a real museum. It's just not always possible. Um, there is a possibility to create virtual museums as an adjunct or a supplement to real museums. They can serve as training platforms, prototyping and test platforms, um, as an adjunct to the content in your real museum so that folks can visit them on their own time. And we did some case studies of a few museums that I built. And so that's what we covered today. We're almost out of time, but I did want to leave a few minutes in case anybody has any comments or any questions. I guess either in voice or chat.
Thank
And I know,
you.
Val, if you said before we're going to be stepping over for a more sort of informal chat and social thing if anyone wants to stay for that.
Yes, that is the plan. We usually stand and walk over to our social happy hour where there are virtual refreshments. So why don't I go ahead and wrap this up here and we'll walk over there since it's getting close to the top of the hour. I want to thank you so much for sharing today. Museums built in the metaverse do allow us to enter spaces that we might not be able to visit in the physical world. So I wanted to also share in closing a reminder that you'll be able to find the recording today on our YouTube channel. And please know we welcome any of you as volunteers to help VWEC, which is open to anyone interested in teaching and learning in virtual worlds. And if you're interested in working right here as a volunteer at the Info Center, you can contact me or Sue Moon Magic. I will just say quickly that our next expert series event will be on November 22nd, and the session will be presented by Claudio Pancani, who is John No One in Second Life, and it really will build on the great content that Brian has shared today about why and his experience in building museums. Claudio is the director of Museum Island, a cultural and educational historic sim in Second Life. So that's going to follow up really well. We do have our calendar here in local chat if you'd like to check out our events, our YouTube channel, and our social media. I'll put all the links there in chat. Before we stand and go over, I'll just give you one quick feedback. Brian, as you were talking about how people get attached to their tech devices, I thought that was kind of a cool concept to think about. As a librarian, I follow an online, it's not 3D virtual world, but it's an online museum called the Museum of Obsolete Media. And it's fun to look at the history of evolving media and computers. So let's see. Are we ready to stand up and walk on over to the social hour?
I think we are.
All right. If you want to follow me, it's just straight ahead.